A tourist spat on the royal guard's face. What happened next was truly unforgettable. The bustling streets of London were alive with the usual mix of tourists, street performers, and the towering presence of the iconic royal guards, standing motionless in their red uniforms and bearskin hats. The air smelled of warm, roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor, and camera flashes lit up the sidewalk as visitors took their obligatory selfies with the stoic guards. Then, it happened. A loud, arrogant laugh cut through the crowd, followed by the sharp "two" of spit-hitting skin. Gasps erupted as people turned, their faces frozen in disbelief. The man responsible? A wealthy tourist in an expensive, tailored suit, his designer sunglasses resting arrogantly on his nose. He smirked, looking down at the silent, unmoving guard he had just insulted. "What? Can't say anything? Thought so?" he sneered, adjusting the cufflinks on his sleeve. The crowd was stunned. The royal guard, known for their unwavering discipline, stood firm, his face unreadable, a thin line of saliva sliding down his cheek. A single muscle in his jaw twitched, but he remained frozen in place, as dictated by the strict protocol he had sworn to uphold. A woman whispered, "Oh my God, did that really just happen?" A man pulled out his phone, already recording. But no one, not the tourist, not the crowd, was prepared for what was about to unfold next. Because what the tourist didn't realize was that the guard wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. Now what happens next will leave you speechless. Stay with us, because this story is about to take an unforgettable turn. The air around Buckingham Palace felt thick with tension. The spit glistened on the guard's cheek, an insult to centuries of tradition, discipline, and honor. The tourist, an arrogant billionaire from overseas, chuckled, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "What? You're just gonna stand there like a statue? That's pathetic," he scoffed, turning to the crowd for validation. A few tourists exchanged uneasy glances, some muttering under their breath, but no one dared to intervene. Then something unexpected happened. The guard moved. A sharp inhale rippled through the crowd. The tourists' smirk faltered. Royal guards weren't supposed to react to insults. They were trained to endure anything: mockery, distractions, even minor physical contact. But this time, something was different. With perfect precision, the guard lifted his heavy ceremonial rifle and took a single thunderous step forward. His polished boot hit the pavement with a force that echoed down the street. Boom. The billionaire flinched. His cocky grin disappeared. You can't touch me," he stammered, stepping back instinctively. The guard's jaw tightened, his expression still unreadable behind his rigid discipline. But his voice, deep and commanding, broke through the stunned silence. "Step back." It wasn't a request. It was an order. The billionaire's confidence cracked. He looked around, expecting someone, anyone, to step in on his behalf. But the crowd wasn't on his side. Instead, they were glued to their phones, capturing every second of his humiliation. Then, as if the universe had its own way of delivering justice, the sound of marching boots approached from the distance. Another guard unit. A higher-ranking officer led them, his eyes locked onto the scene. The tourist swallowed hard, realizing he might have just made the biggest mistake of his life. And what happened next shocked even the crowd. The clattering of boots against the pavement sent a chill through the arrogant tourist's spine. The approaching unit of royal guards moved with unwavering precision. Their leader, a high-ranking officer, walking at the front, his piercing gaze locked onto the billionaire. The crowd instinctively parted, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Phones were held higher, fingers hovered over record buttons. This wasn't just a moment anymore. It was history unfolding before their eyes. The officer came to a halt directly in front of the shaken tourist. His polished metals gleamed under the London sun, a stark contrast to the cold steel in his expression. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice was calm, yet laced with authority. The billionaire cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "I was just testing the discipline of your guards," he said, forcing a smirk. "I mean, If they're supposed to be the best, they should be able to handle a little fun, right? The crowd murmured. Some scoffed in disgust. Others shook their heads. The officer didn't react. Instead, he slowly turned to the royal guard who had been spit on, standing firm like a statue, the dried insult still visible on his face. Without breaking eye contact with the guard, the officer gave a single deliberate nod. Then something no one expected happened. The guard, in one swift motion, lifted his ceremonial rifle, turned sharply, and pointed it directly at the billionaire's chest. A collective gasp erupted. The tourist stumbled back, his eyes wide. Wait, what the hell? You can't do that. The officer's voice was steady. Disrespecting a royal guard is considered an offense under the law, but more importantly, his gaze sharpened. It is an insult to the very institution that has protected this nation for centuries. The tourist's breath quickened. His mind raced. Was this just for show, or was he actually about to face real consequences? Then the officer took a slow step forward and said something that made the billionaire's blood run cold. You wanted to test his discipline? Let's see how well you handle it. And just when the crowd thought they had seen everything, things took an even darker turn. The billionaire's smugness had completely evaporated. His breathing was shallow, his designer shoes scuffing against the pavement as he instinctively backed away from the guard's raised rifle. The crowd was silent, transfixed. Every second felt stretched, the tension hanging in the air like a coiled spring ready to snap. The officer took another step forward, his eyes locked onto the billionaire's trembling form. You believe discipline is a joke? That honor is something to be mocked? The officer's voice was low but sharp as a blade. The billionaire swallowed hard. I was just messing around. I didn't mean... Silence. The word was delivered with such authority that the tourist froze mid-sentence. Then, the officer turned to the guard who had been spat on. Guardsman, stand down. In perfect synchronization, the royal guard lowered his rifle, resuming his formal position. His face remained emotionless, but the air around him carried the weight of silent, unwavering dignity. The officer's gaze flicked back to the billionaire, whose relief was short-lived. You may have wealth, the officer said, but money cannot buy respect. And today, you will learn what it means to face the consequences of your actions. The tourist let out a nervous chuckle. What? You're not actually going to? Guards. At the command, 2 more royal guards stepped forward, their movements sharp and decisive. Before the billionaire could react, he felt firm hands grip his arms. Wait. What are you doing? I have rights. I have lawyers. The officer's lips curled into something that almost resembled amusement. And we have rules, and under those rules you will answer for your actions. The tourist struggled, his panic rising. The crowd? They were loving every second. Cheers and murmurs of approval rippled through them. Some even clapped. The officer leaned in slightly. Since you enjoy testing discipline so much, let's see how well you follow orders. And with that, the billionaire was escorted away, but not before something truly unexpected happened. If you think justice has been served, you're wrong, because the real twist is still coming. You won't believe what happens next. Hit like and subscribe to stay with us as this story takes an unbelievable turn. The billionaire's protests grew louder as the royal guards led him away. You can't do this. Do you have any idea who I am? He shouted, his voice laced with desperation. The officer remained unmoved, walking beside him with an air of quiet authority. The crowd trailed behind at a distance, still recording, murmuring in excitement. But where the tourist was expecting a police station or a small fine, the guards led him somewhere else entirely, behind the palace gates. The billionaire's confidence crumbled. He had assumed this was all for show, a public humiliation to scare him. But now he wasn't sure. Where are you taking me? He demanded, his voice unsteady. The officer didn't answer. Instead, they stepped into a courtyard where a small but intimidating group of high-ranking officials stood waiting. The tourist's stomach twisted. These weren't just security personnel. These were men who commanded true power. A suited man with sharp eyes stepped forward. His voice was calm, but his words hit like iron. "You have insulted not just a soldier, but a symbol of this country's honor. Do you understand the weight of what you've done?" The billionaire scoffed, trying to mask his fear with arrogance. "Oh, come on. It was just a little spit. Don't act like I started a war." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, the officer who had been leading him spoke again. "You assume there are no consequences for your actions because of your wealth. But in this country, respect is not dictated by money. It is earned." The billionaire opened his mouth to retort, but before he could, the suited man continued. "You will be given a choice," he said, his voice measured. A chill ran down the tourist's spine. "Choice?" he echoed. The officer nodded. "You may leave now, with the understanding that your name will be released to the public, along with footage of your actions." The billionaire's face paled. His business empire relied on reputation. Public image was everything. If this got out, he would be ruined. "Or," the officer continued, "you can take a different path, one that allows you to understand the weight of what you mocked today." The billionaire hesitated. "And what exactly does that mean?" The suited man's expression didn't change. "You will spend 24 hours under the same discipline you ridiculed. No privileges, no exemptions. You will follow every command of the Royal Guard, without question." The billionaire's eyes widened. "You want me to play soldier? You can't be serious." The officer stepped closer. "You wanted to test our discipline. Now it is time for yours to be tested." The billionaire looked around, expecting someone to laugh, to tell him this was some elaborate joke. But no one did. And deep down, he knew. This was real. The billionaire stood frozen, his mind racing. He had always been in control. His money, his influence, his name, they had shielded him from consequences his entire life. But now he was being given a choice that felt like no choice at all. If he walked away, his reputation would be shattered. The world would see him as the man who spit on a royal guard and then ran from the fallout. His businesses would take a hit. Investors would lose faith. The internet would tear him apart. But if he stayed, 24 hours under royal guard discipline, no special treatment, no way out. His throat felt dry. "Fine," he muttered. The officer's eyes didn't waver. "Speak clearly," he said. The billionaire swallowed his pride, his voice stronger this time. "I'll do it." The officer gave a single nod. "Then your time starts now." Without another word, one of the guards stepped forward, handing the billionaire a folded uniform. "Change. You will wear this." The billionaire frowned, unfolding the thick red tunic and white gloves. It was heavy, rigid, nothing like the tailored suits he was used to. "Now, in front of everyone?" he asked. The officer's expression remained blank. Discipline begins with obedience. Heat flushed the billionaire's face as the small crowd of officials and guards watched him. There was no privacy here, no escape from humiliation. With reluctant hands, he stripped off his expensive blazer, his gold watch, his silk tie. He pulled the uniform over his head, the stiff fabric unfamiliar against his skin. Then, the boots. The moment he laced them up, something inside him shifted. He wasn't a powerful billionaire anymore. He wasn't the man people catered to, the man who could do whatever he wanted. He was just another man in uniform. The officer stepped forward. "From this moment on, you will follow every command given to you. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will stand where we tell you to stand. You will move only when ordered. Is that understood?" The billionaire hesitated, just for a second. Then, he nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good. Then take your place." The officer turned, leading him toward the front gates of the palace. The billionaire followed, the weight of the uniform heavier with every step. And when they reached the spot where the original royal guard had been stationed, the very place where he had spit in a man's face, they made him stand there, feet together, back straight, eyes forward. The billionaire felt the burn in his muscles almost immediately. He was already uncomfortable, already regretting his decision. Then the final order came. You will not move, not for tourists, not for the cameras, not for anything. And as the first wave of tourists arrived, cameras flashing, people pointing, some laughing, the billionaire finally understood. He had mocked discipline. He had ridiculed the traditions of a nation. He had thought the royal guards were just decoration. But now, for the first time in his life, he knew what it felt like to be powerless. And what came next would push him further than he ever thought possible. This is where things get really intense. How long can he last? Will he break under the pressure? You won't believe what happens next. Stay tuned. Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the moment everything changes. The sun hung high in the sky, its relentless heat beating down on the billionaire's back. He had stood in place for what felt like hours, his muscles screaming, his face stiff from forcing himself to stay expressionless. But the worst part? The tourists. They had no idea who he was. To them, he was just another royal guard, standing still, emotionless, silent. And they treated him exactly the way he had treated the real guards, like statues, like props. A group of teenagers approached first, giggling. One of them waved a hand in front of his face, no reaction. Another snapped a selfie inches away from him, laughing at how ridiculous he looked. "Do you think they're even real?" one of them whispered. "Let's see." Another one grinned, and before the billionaire could even brace himself, the teenager clapped loudly right in front of his face. He flinched. The teenagers burst into laughter. The officer, standing a few feet away, caught the movement instantly. "You moved," he said, his voice flat but firm. The billionaire swallowed. No excuses. You failed. Again." More tourists crowded around. Some whistled, some tried to make him laugh. Others threw comments he had once thrown himself. "Look at them, they don't even react. Bet he's not even human." And then, the worst of them, a man with a thick accent and an expensive watch. The kind of man the billionaire had probably done business with in another life. "What a joke," the man scoffed. "All that training, and they're just statues. Pathetic." It was like looking into a mirror. The billionaire's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tightening. He wanted to yell, to break formation, to tell them all that they had no idea what it took to stand here, to endure this. But he couldn't, because now, he was the one being tested. Minutes stretched into an hour. The uniform felt heavier by the second. His legs shook. His arms burned. He had been standing still for years, in boardrooms, in meetings, in power plays. But never like this. This wasn't just standing. This was discipline. This was humility. And for the first time in his life, he was experiencing both. The officer walked past him again, his voice quiet enough that only the billionaire could hear. "Now you understand." The billionaire wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that he already understood. But did he? Because just as his body reached its breaking point, just as he was ready to collapse, he heard a familiar sound. The sound of a single, deliberate step forward. The sound of a royal guard moving. His heart stopped. Something was about to happen. The billionaire's breath caught in his throat. That sound, a single, precise step, wasn't supposed to happen. Not unless... The royal guard who had been spat on stepped forward. The crowd gasped. Tourists instinctively backed away, phones held high, recording every moment. This was unheard of. The guards never broke formation unless absolutely necessary. The billionaire's body was locked in place, but his mind raced. The officer turned to the guard, his expression unreadable. "Guardsman, you are dismissed." Another ripple of shock ran through the crowd. The billionaire's stomach dropped. "Dismissed?" he whispered, finally breaking his silence. The officer turned to him. Yes, you've stood in his place long enough. Now, you will hear his words. For the first time since the incident began, the guard spoke. His voice was steady, calm, but carried the weight of something deeper. You spit on me. The billionaire felt his throat tighten. You laughed at me, mocked my discipline, humiliated me in front of the world. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was heavy. The billionaire felt it in his chest, in his gut, in the very core of who he was. Then, the guard took another step forward. But I stood still. The billionaire swallowed. Not because I was weak, not because I was powerless. The guard's gaze locked onto his, but because I knew who I was. The world around them seemed to fall silent. The billionaire's pulse pounded in his ears. The guard's voice remained calm. Did you? The question hit harder than any insult, any consequence, because for the first time, the billionaire wasn't sure of the answer. He had spent his entire life believing that power came from control, from dominance, from always being the one calling the shots. But this man, this soldier, had shown more strength by standing still than he ever had in a lifetime of running the world. The billionaire exhaled shakily. Then, something no one expected happened. He dropped to one knee, not from exhaustion, not from defeat, but from understanding. The crowd was silent. Even the tourists who had been laughing earlier watched in stunned disbelief. The officer gave a slow nod of approval. Your lesson is over. The billionaire closed his eyes, letting the moment sink in. He had walked into this place believing he was untouchable. He was leaving knowing that respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned. And as he rose to his feet, peeling off the uniform and stepping back into his own shoes, he realized something else. He had never been richer than he was in this moment.